In the next 30 seconds, I'm going to say something that will make 90% of you want to click away from this video. But if you stay, you'll understand why Carl Jung predicted exactly what's happening to our minds right now, over 100 years ago. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Jung wrote those words in 1931. He had no idea that nearly a century later, millions of people would use those very unconscious forces to attack anyone who dared to heal. I know, because it happened to me. 3 months ago, I did something I thought would inspire people. After 10 years of struggling with autism and ADHD, after countless therapists, medications, and moments of wanting to give up entirely, I had finally found a way through. Not around my neurodivergence, not despite it, but through it. And I was excited. God, I was so excited to share what I discovered. So, I went to Reddit. I typed up my story with trembling fingers, my heart racing with the hope that maybe, just maybe, I could help one person who was struggling like I had struggled. I hit post, and then I waited. The first comment came in less than a minute. "This is dangerous misinformation." The second, 30 seconds later. "You're delusional if you think you healed autism." Within an hour, my inbox was a war zone. 226 comments, most of them variations of the same theme. How dare you? How dare you suggest healing is possible? How dare you give people false hope? How dare you exist? But here's where it gets interesting. Here's where Jung's insights become terrifyingly relevant. A psychologist, someone trained to help people heal, told me to stop being delusional and trust real science instead of lived experience. Think about that for a moment. A mental health professional dismissing lived experience in favor of dogma. A child speech therapist went further. She admitted that her colleagues were increasingly discovering the connection between trauma and neurodivergence, but she still clung to the genetic model. She saw the evidence, saw my story, and chose blindness. Then came my favorite. A scientist, someone dedicated to truth and discovery, simply wrote, "As an autistic scientist, fuck you." 3 words. Years of education, research, dedication to understanding the universe, reduced to 3 words of pure rage. Why? What button had I pushed that could transform a scientist into this? But the comment that revealed everything, the one that made Jung's theories crystal clear, came from someone who literally admitted their motivation. "I'm only replying to this idiot because he gives me a dopamine hit." There it was. Naked. Honest. They weren't engaging with my ideas or my experience. They were using me as a drug. My story of healing had become their digital heroin, and they needed their fix of outrage. They didn't come to support. They came to destroy. And I understand why now. Jung understood it 100 years ago. But before I explain what's really happening here, before I reveal why strangers would unleash such hatred on someone they'd never met, I need you to do something for me. Look at the comment section right now. Don't type anything yet. Just look, because I'm about to ask you a question that will determine everything that happens next in your life. In the past week, which have you fed more, your shadow or your light? Type shadow. If you've spent more time in anger, judgment, criticism, or fear, type light if you've spent more time in compassion, growth, understanding, or hope. But here's the catch. I want you to include one specific moment, one real moment from this week, where you felt either of these forces moving through you. Because what happened to me on Reddit wasn't really about autism or ADHD. It wasn't about healing or science or even truth. It was about something much deeper, something Jung discovered that scared him so much, he spent the rest of his life trying to warn us. The attackers weren't angry at me. They were terrified of something inside themselves. Something they'd buried so deep, the mere suggestion of its existence sent them into a primal rage. And that something? It's in you too, right now, reading these words, deciding whether to trust me or dismiss me, whether to hope or to defend. Jung called it the shadow. And once you understand what it really is, you'll never see your diagnosis, your struggles, or your potential the same way again. Why did strangers unleash such hate? The answer lies in a part of us we all hide. A part that, once revealed, changes everything. Let me show you what Jung discovered. Let me show you what they're so afraid of. And let me show you why your greatest wound might be your greatest invitation. But first, you need to understand what the shadow really is. Because it's not what you think, It's not your dark side or your evil twin or any of that Hollywood nonsense. It's much more interesting than that, and much more powerful. Imagine for a moment that you're 5 years old. You're in kindergarten, and you're angry, really angry. Maybe someone took your toy. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're overwhelmed by all the noise and chaos. So, you do what feels natural. You scream. You hit. You express exactly what you're feeling with your whole body. And then it happens. The teacher's face changes. Your parents are called. Suddenly, everyone is looking at you like you're bad, wrong, broken. So you learn. You learn to smile when you want to scream. You learn to sit still when every cell in your body wants to move. You learn to say, "I'm fine," when you're drowning. You take all that anger, all that authentic expression, and you push it down, down, down into the darkness where no one can see it. Congratulations. You've just created your first piece of shadow. Carl Jung discovered something that modern psychology is only beginning to understand. We don't just have one self. We have the self we show the world, what Jung called the persona, and we have all the parts of ourselves we've rejected, denied, or hidden. That's the shadow. And here's the kicker. The shadow doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. It grows stronger. It finds other ways to express itself. It becomes our fate. But when it comes to neurodivergence, the shadow takes on a whole new dimension. Think about masking for a moment. If you're autistic or ADHD, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's that exhausting performance where you pretend to be normal. You force eye contact that feels like staring into the sun. You suppress your stims, those self-soothing movements that help you regulate. You laugh at jokes you don't understand and nod along to small talk that feels like psychological torture. Every time you mask, you're not just hiding your neurodivergence. You're creating shadow. You're telling yourself that who you really are is unacceptable, wrong, something to be ashamed of. And that shadow doesn't just sit there quietly. It manifests as anxiety, depression, meltdowns, burnout. What we call symptoms are often just the shadow screaming to be acknowledged. Let me give you a concrete example. I used to apologize constantly for existing, for taking up space, for breathing too loud, for thinking differently. Sorry was my most used word. I thought I was being polite, considerate, a good person. But Jung would say I was feeding my shadow. Every apology was me rejecting my right to exist as I am. Every sorry was me agreeing that I was wrong, broken, too much. And my body kept the score. Chronic tension in my shoulders from constantly shrinking myself. Digestive issues from swallowing my truth. Insomnia from the war between who I was and who I thought I had to be. This is where modern neuroscience starts to validate what Jung intuited. The default mode. Network, that neural network active when we're not focused on the outside world, shows distinct differences in neurodivergent brains. But here's what's fascinating. Trauma also alters the DMN. Chronic masking creates similar patterns to trauma. We're literally traumatizing ourselves by rejecting our nature. The polyvagal theory takes this even further. Our nervous system has 3 states: safe and social, fight or flight, and freeze or shutdown. When we constantly suppress our authentic responses, when we live in perpetual masking mode, we get stuck in freeze. We dissociate from our bodies, from our emotions, from our truth. We become ghosts, haunting our own lives. But Jung saw something else, something revolutionary. He said the shadow isn't just our personal darkness, it's also our hidden gold. Everything we've rejected includes not just the bad stuff, but also our power, our uniqueness, our gifts. For neurodivergent people, this is especially profound. That hyperfocus you've been told is a problem, that's your superpower in shadow. That sensitivity to stimuli that overwhelms you, that's your capacity for profound perception, locked away. That inability to tolerate small talk, that's your hunger for authentic connection, suppressed and shamed. I discovered this firsthand during my healing journey. The more I stopped apologizing for my autism, the more I realized my sensory sensitivity wasn't a curse. It was like having a more refined instrument. Yes, loud noises still hurt, but I could also perceive subtleties others missed. Emotional undercurrents in a room. The real message beneath someone's words. The interconnectedness of everything. My ADHD wasn't a deficit of attention. It was an abundance of awareness that I'd been taught to fear. When I stopped trying to focus like a neurotypical person and started working with my brain's natural patterns, I became more productive than ever. My chaos wasn't disorder. It was creative potential. But here's where it gets really interesting. Jung believed that integrating the shadow wasn't just personal work. It was collective work. We don't just have individual shadows. We have collective shadows. Things entire societies reject and deny. And right now, in our society, neurodivergence is a massive collective shadow. We've created a world that demands conformity, productivity, linear thinking. Anyone who doesn't fit that mold gets diagnosed, medicated, therapized into compliance. We've literally pathologized different ways of being human. The statistics are staggering. Adult ADHD diagnoses increased by 400% between 2007 and 2023. Autism diagnoses are skyrocketing. Are more people suddenly becoming neurodivergent? Or are we finally recognizing what's always been there, what we've always been shadowing? But the real question is, what happens when we stop shadowing these parts of ourselves? Here's a mini exercise for you. I want you to recall a specific time when you hid an emotion or reaction to fit in. Maybe you suppressed a stim in public. Maybe you forced yourself to make eye contact. Maybe you pretended to enjoy something that was actually torture for you. Got that moment? Good. Now notice, how did your body feel afterward? Was there tightness in your chest? A heaviness in your stomach? A fog in your mind? That physical sensation? That's your shadow, making itself known. That's your authentic self saying, I'm still here, even if you won't acknowledge me. Now, I want you to type in the comments. What trait do you dislike most about yourself but suspect could be a hidden strength? Maybe your chaos fuels your creativity. Maybe your sensitivity is actually deep empathy. Maybe your inability to follow rules is visionary thinking. Don't think too hard. Just type the first thing that comes to mind. Because your shadow already knows the answer. It's been waiting for you to ask. The people who attacked me on Reddit weren't really angry about my healing story. They were terrified of their own shadows. They were terrified that if healing was possible, if integration was real, then they'd have to face all the parts of themselves they'd buried. They'd have to question the identity they'd built around their diagnosis. They'd have to feel all the pain they'd been numbing. And that's terrifying. I get it. I was terrified too. But on the other side of that terror, on the other side of facing your shadow, that's where the magic happens. That's where you discover that everything you thought was wrong with you might actually be everything that's right with you, just twisted and suppressed and shamed into hiding. The question is, are you ready to meet your shadow? Are you ready to discover what's really been driving your life? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you know what's possible, you can't unknow it. And that's exactly what those Reddit attackers were afraid of. Let me tell you something that's going to sound harsh at first, but stay with me. The people who attacked me with the most venom, the ones who typed the cruelest words, the ones who seemed to take personal pleasure in trying to destroy a stranger on the internet, they were the ones closest to breakthrough. Jung said something profound. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But he also said something darker. The most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm that is not easily disturbed. Those attackers? They weren't in conflict with me. They were in conflict with themselves, and I was just the mirror that showed them what they couldn't bear to see. Let me show you what I mean by analyzing two specific types of attackers, because once you recognize these patterns, you'll see them everywhere. First, we have what I call the moral crusader. This was the psychologist who told me I was spreading dangerous misinformation and needed to trust real science. On the surface, they're protecting vulnerable people from false hope. Noble, right? But look deeper. This is someone who has built their entire identity, their career, their sense of self-worth around being the expert, the helper, the one with answers. They've invested years in education, thousands of dollars in degrees, constructed their whole life around a certain model of reality. And here comes some random person on Reddit saying, actually, I healed myself without you. Can you imagine the shadow that triggers? All the doubts they've suppressed about whether they're really helping people. All the times they've seen clients not improve and blamed the client rather than questioning the model. All the fear that maybe, just maybe, they've been part of a system that keeps people sick rather than helps them heal. So, they attack. Not because they're evil, but because the alternative, examining their own shadow, would mean questioning everything they've built their life on. It's easier to call me delusional than to wonder if they've been deluding themselves. Then we have the burnt idealist. This is the person who wrote, "I'm only replying to this idiot because he gives me a dopamine hit." This is someone who has tried to heal, who has done the work, read the books, maybe even had moments of hope. But somewhere along the way, they gave up. They decided healing wasn't possible. They settled into their diagnosis like a prison cell and decorated it to feel like home. And then I come along, claiming I found a way out. Do you understand what that means to someone who has given up? It means all their suffering might have been unnecessary. It means they could have made different choices. It means they're not a victim of circumstance, but an active participant in their own imprisonment. That's unbearable. So, they need me to be lying. They need me to be delusional. Because if I'm telling the truth, then they have to face the most terrifying question of all. What if I gave up too soon? But here's where it gets really interesting. After my Reddit post blew up, something unexpected happened. While the public comments were full of rage and dismissal, my private messages told a different story. 15 different people messaged me privately to say some version of, "I'm healing too, but I can't say it publicly. They'll crucify me like they're crucifying you." One message particularly stood out. It was from someone who had been particularly vicious in the public comments. They had called me dangerous and irresponsible. But in private, they wrote, "I'm sorry, I'm working with a Jungian therapist. I've been doing shadow work for 6 months. My symptoms are decreasing, but I can't tell anyone. My whole identity is built around being autistic. My friends, my community, my online presence. If I say I'm healing, I lose everything. So I attacked you instead. I'm sorry." Do you see what's happening here? We've created a culture where healing is seen as betrayal, where getting better is viewed as abandoning your tribe, where your diagnosis becomes your identity, and questioning it becomes heresy. Jung would have had a field day with this. He talked about collective shadows, things entire groups reject and project onto others. The neurodivergent community, in trying to fight stigma and create acceptance, has created its own shadow, the possibility of change. Think about it. For decades, neurodivergent people were told they were broken, wrong, in need of fixing. The community fought back, rightfully so, saying, "We're not broken, we're different, we don't need to be fixed." But, like all collective movements, it went too far. Now, suggesting that some aspects of neurodivergence might be trauma responses, might be changeable, might be healable, isn't just disagreement. It's betrayal. It's violence. It's attacking the very foundation of the identity they've fought so hard to build. And I get it. I really do. When you've been told your whole life that you're wrong, finally finding a community that says you're perfect as you are feels like salvation. When you've struggled for so long, accepting that this is just how you are brings a kind of peace. There's no more fighting, no more hoping, no more disappointment. But it's a false peace. It's what Jung called the regressive restoration of the persona. It's creating a new mask to replace the old one. Instead of masking to appear neurotypical, now you're masking to appear permanently neurodivergent. Either way, you're still not free. The third type of attacker I want to mention is perhaps the most telling. The scientist. Remember the one who simply wrote, "As an autistic scientist, fuck you"? This is someone who has used their intelligence, their analytical ability, their systematic thinking, all traits associated with autism, to build a successful career. They've turned their neurodivergence into a superpower. So, why the rage? Because if autism can be healed, what does that mean for their identity? Are they successful because of their autism? Or despite it? If they could change, would they? Should they? The very possibility opens up an existential crisis they've worked very hard to avoid. Here's an exercise for you, and this one might sting a little. Think of someone who really angers you, someone whose very existence or opinions make you feel personally attacked. Got them in mind? Good. Now ask yourself, what part of you might they be mirroring? What have they achieved that you've given up on? What do they believe that you desperately want to believe but are afraid to? What freedom do they have that you've convinced yourself isn't possible? Because here's the truth Jung discovered. We don't hate in others what we love in ourselves. We hate in others what we've rejected in ourselves. Every projection is a confession. Every attack is an admission. The people who attacked me weren't really talking to me. They were talking to the parts of themselves they'd buried, the hope they'd killed, the possibility they'd rejected, the healing they'd given up on. And the fiercest attackers, the ones who seemed to take personal pleasure in trying to destroy me, they were the ones whose shadows were screaming the loudest. They were the ones closest to breakthrough, fighting hardest against it. Because here's what nobody tells you about shadow work. The closer you get to integration, the louder the resistance becomes. The more light you shine, the darker the shadows appear. The more you heal, the more threatening you become to those who haven't. But, and this is crucial, this isn't about being better than them. This isn't about winning or being right. This is about recognizing that their pain is real, their fear is valid, and their attacks are actually invitations. Invitations to go deeper, to understand more, to have compassion for the parts of ourselves that are still attacking, still defending, still afraid, because we all have those parts. We all have moments where we'd rather destroy hope than risk disappointment. We all have times when we'd rather attack the messenger than examine the message. The question is, what do we do when we catch ourselves in that pattern? Do we double down like my attackers, building higher walls around our shadow? Or do we get curious? Do we ask, what am I really defending here? And what would happen if I stopped? Type mirror in the comments if you've ever attacked someone for achieving something you'd given up on. No judgment, no shame, just recognition. Because owning our projections is the first step to reclaiming our power. And that power, it's been there all along, waiting in the shadow, waiting for us to stop attacking it in others and start integrating it in ourselves. I need to tell you about the night I got drunk and apologized to a houseplant. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I know. But this moment, this ridiculous, embarrassing, absolutely crucial moment, was when everything changed. When I finally understood what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." It was 3 years into my journey. I'd tried everything: therapy, medication, meditation, diets, supplements, behavioral interventions, social skills training. I had a filing cabinet full of diagnoses and strategies and absolutely no hope left. That night, I'd had too much wine. I was alone in my apartment, and I bumped into my pothos plant, knocking a few leaves off, and I just broke. I found myself on my knees, sobbing, apologizing to this plant for existing, for taking up space, for being clumsy, for being me. "I'm sorry," I whispered to those green leaves. "I'm sorry I'm so much. I'm sorry I can't be normal. I'm sorry I exist." And in that moment, in the depths of my drunken despair, something shifted. Because the plant, obviously, didn't care. It didn't need my apology. It didn't think I was too much. It was just being a plant, existing without apology, growing toward the light without shame. The absurdity hit me like lightning. Here I was, a human being with consciousness and dreams and the capacity for love, apologizing to a houseplant for existing. How had I gotten here? When had I decided that my very existence was something to apologize for? That was the night I truly met my shadow. Not in some mystical vision or therapeutic breakthrough, but on my kitchen floor, drunk and crying, facing the fundamental belief that had driven my entire life. I am wrong. I am too much. I don't deserve to exist as I am. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Well, my unconscious belief had been directing my life into smaller and smaller boxes. Each diagnosis added another wall. Each failed treatment added another lock. Each well-meaning professional who told me to manage my symptoms added another bar to my cage. But that night with the plant, I saw it clearly. I had been my own jailer. The journey from that realization to where I am now wasn't linear. Healing never is. It was more like a spiral, circling back to the same issues, but from a slightly higher perspective each time. Week 1 after the plant incident, I made a decision. I would stop apologizing for existing. Sounds simple, right? It was torture. Do you know how many times a day I said sorry without even realizing it? Sorry for asking questions. Sorry for taking up space in the grocery store. Sorry for having needs. Sorry for breathing. Each time I caught myself about to apologize, I paused. I asked myself, am I actually sorry? Did I do something harmful? Or am I apologizing for being human? 9 times out of 10, it was the latter. By week 3, something strange started happening. The less I apologized for existing, the less overwhelming the world became. It was like I'd been carrying a 100-pound weight of shame everywhere I went. No wonder I was exhausted. No wonder social situations drained me. I was spending all my energy trying to make myself smaller, quieter, less. Week 5 brought the first major breakthrough. I was in a crowded coffee shop, the kind of place that usually sent me into sensory overload. Fluorescent lights, coffee grinder, multiple conversations, music playing. Normally, I would have fled or shut down. But this time, I didn't apologize to myself for being sensitive. I didn't tell myself I was weak or broken. I just acknowledged, this is a lot of sensory input. My nervous system is responding normally to an intense environment. And then, instead of fighting it or fleeing, I got curious. What if my sensitivity wasn't a bug but a feature? What if I was picking up on things others missed? I started paying attention differently. Yes, the lights were bright, but I noticed how they created interesting shadows on the wall. Yes, the conversations were loud, but I could hear the emotion beneath the words. The loneliness in one voice, the excitement in another, the fear masquerading as anger in a third. My autism wasn't a disorder. It was a different order, a different way of processing reality. And when I stopped apologizing for it, when I stopped trying to force my square peg consciousness into a round hole, something miraculous happened. I became an empath, not in some mystical, woo-woo way, but in a real, practical, almost overwhelming way. All that sensitivity I'd been trying to suppress, it was actually a finely tuned instrument for reading the emotional field of a room. All that pattern recognition my autistic brain did naturally, it could be applied to human behavior, predicting what people needed before they asked. The ADHD transformation was equally profound. You know what ADHD really is when you stop seeing it as a deficit? It's having a consciousness that refuses to be linear in a world that demands straight lines. It's a brain that sees connections everywhere, that can hold multiple realities simultaneously, that thrives in chaos because it understands that chaos is just order we haven't recognized yet. When I stopped trying to focus the way neurotypical people do, when I stopped shaming myself for my scattered attention, I discovered something incredible. I could work on 5 projects simultaneously, and they would all inform each other. My distraction was actually my brain making connections others couldn't see. My hyperactivity was creative energy, looking for expression. But here's the thing about shadow work that nobody warns you about. As you integrate these rejected parts, you don't just get the gifts, you also get the grief. All the years of masking, of suppressing, of believing you were broken. That pain doesn't just disappear, it needs to be felt. There were days when the grief knocked me flat. Grief for the child who learned to hate herself. Grief for the teenager who thought she was fundamentally flawed. Grief for the adult who had accepted a life of limitation. Sometimes I would cry for hours, not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of finally allowing myself to exist. Month 3 brought another shift. I started seeing my traits not as fixed symptoms, but as strategies. My social anxiety wasn't a disorder. It was a protective mechanism from years of being misunderstood. My executive dysfunction wasn't a broken brain. It was rebellion against a system that didn't make sense to me. My sensory issues weren't oversensitivity. They were a nervous system that had been in defensive mode for so long. It had forgotten how to relax. When you see symptoms as strategies, you can ask different questions. Not, how do I fix this? But what is this protecting me from? What is this trying to tell me? What need is this trying to meet? My stimming, which I'd hidden for years, turned out to be my body's way of regulating my nervous system. When I stopped suppressing it and started stimming consciously, my anxiety decreased dramatically. Those repetitive movements weren't weird or wrong. They were my body's wisdom, trying to keep me balanced in an unbalanced world. My need for routine, which had been labeled as rigid thinking, was actually my way of creating safety in chaos. When I honored that need instead of fighting it, I could be more flexible in other areas. Structure became my launching pad for creativity, not my prison. The transformation wasn't overnight. It was thousands of tiny moments of choosing differently, choosing curiosity over judgment, choosing acceptance over resistance, choosing to believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't broken. I was just human in a way that didn't fit the current mold. 6 months in, I had what I can only describe as an integration experience. I was walking in nature, not doing anything special, when suddenly I felt whole. For the first time in my life, I wasn't at war with myself. My sensitivity and my strength were the same thing. My chaos and my creativity were dance partners. My autism and my empathy were two sides of the same coin. I stood there in the woods and laughed, really laughed. Not the masked laugh I'd performed for others, but the deep, authentic laugh of recognition. I wasn't broken. I had never been broken. I was just convinced I was. And that conviction had created my reality. This is what Jung meant by individuation. Not becoming someone else, but becoming who you always were, before the world told you who to be. Not fixing yourself, but uncovering yourself. Not healing from autism or ADHD, but healing the wound of believing they made you wrong. Here's a reflection pause for you. What part of your life are you still defending instead of feeling? Where are you using logic to avoid emotion? Where are you using diagnosis to avoid responsibility? Not blame, responsibility. The ability to respond differently. Write it down. Don't share it unless you want to. Just write it, because naming it is the first step to transforming it. And now, I want you to describe in the comments one moment when you felt truly seen, not despite your neurodivergence, but including it. When someone saw your sensitivity as strength, your intensity as passion, your different thinking as innovation, how can you recreate that? How can you see yourself that way? Because here's what I learned on my kitchen floor with that patient pothos plant. The world doesn't need you to be normal. It needs you to be you, fully, authentically, unapologetically. Your sensitivity is needed. Your intensity is needed. Your different perspective is desperately, urgently needed. But first, you have to stop apologizing for it. You have to stop trying to fit into a world that wasn't designed for you and start creating a life that honors who you actually are. The journey from masking to authenticity, from disorder to different order, from shadow to integration. It's not easy. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But on the other side is freedom. Not freedom from being neurodivergent, but freedom to be neurodivergent without shame, without apology, without constantly betraying yourself for others' comfort. And that freedom? It changes everything. I'm about to show you something that might make you angry. It should make you angry. But I need you to channel that anger into understanding, because what you're about to learn could change everything about how you see your diagnosis. Adult ADHD diagnoses increased by 400% between 2007 and 2023. Let that sink in. 400%. In just 16 years, we went from 4% of adults diagnosed to over 15% in some populations. Are human brains suddenly evolving differently? Did we all collectively develop attention deficits? Or is something else happening here? The ADHD medication industry is now worth $13 billion annually. $13 billion. That's more than the GDP of dozens of countries. That's more than we spend on renewable energy research. That's a lot of money riding on you believing your brain is broken. But here's where it gets really interesting. Dr. Gabor Mate, a physician who's spent decades studying ADHD, says something that would get him kicked out of most medical conferences. ADHD is not a disease or disorder, but a set of behavioral patterns that reflect the impact of trauma and stress on the developing brain. Trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. Think about that distinction. It's not the event. It's your internal response to the event. And for sensitive children, for those of us with finely tuned nervous systems, even normal childhood experiences can be traumatic. A stressed parent, a chaotic household, a school system that demands conformity. These aren't dramatic traumas, but for a sensitive child, they're enough to alter brain development. The polyvagal theory, developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, explains how our nervous system responds to threat. When we can't fight or flee, we freeze, we dissociate, we shut down. And when this happens repeatedly in childhood, it becomes our default mode. What gets labeled as inattention might actually be dissociation. What gets called hyperactivity might be a nervous system stuck in fight or flight. But the medical establishment doesn't want to hear this. Why? Because trauma-informed treatment is complex, time-consuming, and doesn't generate $13 billion in pharmaceutical revenue. It's easier to say you have a genetic disorder than to examine how our society creates the very conditions that lead to these disorders. Here's the graph nobody wants you to see. ADHD diagnoses don't increase linearly with better diagnostic tools. They spike during economic recessions. They correlate with rising inequality. They map perfectly onto increasing academic pressure in schools. The more stressed and traumatized a society becomes, the more ADHD we diagnose. And then there's this uncomfortable fact. ADHD medications are amphetamines, the same class of drugs we villainize on the street, we prescribe to children, the same substances that are illegal for adults to use for performance enhancement, we give to 8-year-olds to make them sit still in class. I'm not anti-medication. Let me be clear about that. For some people, in some situations, medication can be life-saving. But when we make it the first and only line of treatment, when we tell people their only option is lifelong pharmaceutical dependence, when we actively discourage exploring root causes, that's not healthcare. That's customer creation. The research that doesn't make headlines tells a different story. Studies on trauma-informed approaches show remarkable results. Mindfulness practices can be as effective as medication for some people. Exercise radically improves ADHD symptoms. Nature exposure, creative expression, somatic therapies, all show promise. But you can't patent a walk in the forest. You can't sell a monthly subscription to creativity. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, has spent decades showing how trauma lives in the body and can be healed through body-based interventions. But his work is largely ignored by mainstream psychiatry. Why? Because it suggests that healing is possible without lifelong medication. It suggests that symptoms have causes. It suggests that we might need to change our society, not just medicate its victims. The autism industry has its own shadows. The ABA therapy market is worth $17 billion. That's $17 billion spent on teaching autistic children to suppress their natural behaviors, to appear normal, to mask more effectively. We're literally creating a multi-billion-dollar industry around teaching children to develop the very shadow that will torment them as adults. Studies show that autistic people who undergo intensive behavioral therapies have higher rates of PTSD. We're traumatizing children in the name of treatment. We're teaching them that who they are is wrong, that their natural ways of being are defects to be corrected. And then we wonder why adult autistic people have such high rates of mental health issues. But here's what really gets me. Here's the part that should make you furious. There are researchers, right now, who know this. There are scientists who have seen the connections between trauma and neurodivergence, between societal stress and rising diagnoses, between forced conformity and psychological distress. But they can't get funding. They can't get published. They're labeled as fringe or alternative or dangerous because the system isn't designed to heal you. It's designed to manage you, to make you a lifelong customer, to convince you that your struggles are your fault, your genetics, your broken brain, anything but a normal response to an abnormal world. Jung saw this coming. He warned about the medicalization of the human experience, the danger of reducing psychological suffering to biological malfunction. He understood that symptoms are messages, that distress is information, that what we call disorder might actually be the psyche's attempt to heal itself. But we don't listen to Jung anymore. We listen to pharmaceutical companies with billion-dollar marketing budgets. We listen to diagnostic manuals written by committees with financial ties to drug manufacturers. We listen to anyone who tells us the solution is simple, purchasable, and doesn't require us to examine ourselves or our society. What disorder have you been told you have that might actually be your unique wiring responding to a world that wasn't designed for you? Think about it. Really, think about it. When did you first learn that the way you naturally are was wrong? Who benefited from you believing that? What would change if you stopped believing it? Because here's the truth they don't want you to know. Your ADHD might not be a deficit of attention. It might be an abundance of awareness in a world that demands tunnel vision. Your autism might not be a social disorder. It might be a different form of consciousness trying to exist in a society built on neurotypical assumptions. The symptoms are real. The suffering is real. But the story we tell about them, that you're broken, that you need fixing, that the solution is lifelong medication, that story is a choice. And it's a choice that generates billions of dollars for industries that depend on you never questioning it. What if we told a different story? What if we saw neurodivergence not as disorder but as diversity? What if we recognized that a society that can't accommodate different ways of being is the thing that needs treatment, not the individuals who don't fit? That's the heresy. That's the thought crime. That's the idea that could bring down a $13 billion industry. And that's why they attacked me so viciously when I suggested healing was possible. Because healing means you're not a lifelong customer. Healing means the problem might not be in your brain. Healing means We might need to change the world instead of medicating the people who can't tolerate its dysfunction. The science supports this heresy. The research is there. But it's buried under marketing budgets and diagnostic dogma and the comfortable lie that your suffering is nobody's fault but your faulty genetics. You deserve to know the truth. You deserve to know that healing is possible. You deserve to know that your symptoms have meanings, your struggles have sources, and your differences might not be deficits at all. But knowing isn't enough. We have to act on what we know. We have to choose the harder path of understanding over the easier path of medication. We have to be willing to be called heretics for believing in our own potential. Because the real disorder isn't in our brains. It's in a system that profits from our suffering and calls it care. Let me tell you about the day Albert Einstein's teacher told his parents he would never amount to anything. Your son is mentally slow, unsociable, and adrift forever in his foolish dreams. Those were the exact words. Mentally slow. The man who would revolutionize our understanding of space and time was dismissed as intellectually deficient because he didn't speak until age 4, couldn't tolerate the rigid structure of school, and spent his time lost in thought experiments that made no sense to anyone else. Today, we diagnose him in a heartbeat. Autism spectrum, ADHD, learning disability. We'd medicate him, put him in special education, teach him to mask his differences. We'd take the very traits that led to E, me, or MC2 and pathologize them into submission. Einstein wasn't alone. Nikola Tesla, the genius who invented alternating current and held over 300 patents, had what we'd now call severe OCD and sensory processing issues. He couldn't touch hair, found jewelry repulsive, and had to calculate the cubic contents of his food before eating. He experienced what he called luminous phenomena, flashes of light and visions that accompanied his inventions. Today, we'd call those hallucinations. We'd prescribe antipsychotics. We'd teach him that his visions were symptoms to suppress, not the birth of innovations that would light the world. But here's my favorite example, because it's about Jung himself. The founder of analytical psychology, the man whose ideas we're exploring, had what he carefully called his confrontation with the unconscious. Between 1913 and 1917, Jung experienced visions, heard voices, and descended into states that today would absolutely result in hospitalization and heavy medication. He saw rivers of blood flowing across Europe, a vision that came true with World War I. He encountered figures from his psyche who spoke to him, taught him, challenged him. He developed a method called active imagination where he would deliberately enter these states to learn from them. Psychotic break? Schizophrenia? By today's standards, absolutely. But Jung didn't suppress these experiences. He engaged with them. He painted them, wrote about them, learned from them. The Red Book, his record of this journey, became the foundation for concepts that would revolutionize psychology. What if Jung had been born today? What if, at the first sign of his visions, he'd been diagnosed and medicated? Would we have analytical psychology? Would we understand the collective unconscious? Would millions of people have found healing through his insights? The shadow of our time is that we've pathologized the very traits that lead to breakthrough. We've decided that thinking differently is a disorder, that sensing differently is a dysfunction, that being human in ways that don't fit the current mold is a medical problem requiring intervention. But let me bring this into the present, because it's not just historical geniuses who demonstrate this pattern. I know Lisa. That's not her real name, but her story is real. Diagnosed autistic at 7, she spent her childhood in behavioral therapies designed to make her appear normal. Stop flapping your hands. Make eye contact. Don't talk about your special interests. Smile appropriately. By 25, she was suicidal. Not because of autism, but because of decades of being taught to hate herself. Then she discovered art therapy. Not therapy to fix her autism, but therapy that honored it. She started painting her sensory experiences. The way sounds had colors, the way emotions had textures, the way she could see patterns others missed. Today, her paintings sell for thousands of dollars. Galleries compete for her work. But more importantly, she's alive. She's thriving. She stopped trying to be neurotypical and started being brilliantly autistic. Her disorder became her artistic signature. Or, take Marcus, diagnosed with severe ADHD. Couldn't sit still in school. Couldn't focus on one thing. Constantly in trouble. Medicated from age 8 to 22. The medication helped him sit still, but it also numbed his creativity, flattened his passion, turned him into what he called a productive zombie. When he finally went off medication and started working with his ADHD instead of against it, everything changed. He started 3 businesses simultaneously, because that's how his brain works. He hired people to handle the details while he generated ideas. Today he employs 50 people and has innovations in sustainable technology that came from his ability to see connections others miss. My ADHD isn't a deficit, he told me. It's like having a Ferrari brain in a go-kart world. The problem wasn't my engine, it was trying to drive on roads built for different vehicles. Temple Grandin, the autistic scientist who revolutionized animal welfare, puts it perfectly. The world needs all kinds of minds. Her autism gives her the ability to think in pictures, to see from an animal's perspective, to notice details that escape neurotypical observers. If she'd been successfully treated to think normally, millions of animals would have suffered unnecessarily. But here's what I really want you to understand. It's not just the famous examples. It's not just the geniuses and the success stories. Every single neurodivergent person has these seeds of brilliance. Every single one. But most of us bury them under shame, medication, and the desperate attempt to appear normal. Your hyperfocus that everyone calls a problem? That's the same trait that let Tesla work for 84 hours straight when inventing. Your sensitivity that overwhelms you? That's the same perception that let Einstein feel the fabric of space-time. Your inability to tolerate small talk? That's the same directness that cuts through to truth. The difference between disorder and genius isn't the trait itself. It's whether you're working with it or against it. It's whether you're trying to suppress it or channel it. It's whether you see it as wrong or simply different. What weird trait of yours could unlock your genius if embraced? Really think about this. What part of you that you've been told is wrong might actually be your superpower in disguise? Maybe your inability to follow arbitrary rules is visionary thinking. Maybe your emotional intensity is the passion that could change the world. Maybe your need for routine is the discipline that could master a craft. The geniuses we celebrate weren't geniuses despite their differences. They were geniuses because of them. They found ways to work with their unique wiring instead of against it. They found environments that supported their needs instead of demanding conformity. They found people who saw their differences as gifts instead of deficits. Jung himself said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not to become normal, not to become acceptable, not to become what others expect, but to become who you truly are, in all your weird, wonderful, neurodivergent glory." The world doesn't need more normal. We have plenty of normal. What we need are the insights that come from different perspectives. We need the innovations that come from thinking differently. We need the truth that comes from those who can't tolerate lies, even comfortable ones. Your neurodivergence isn't a bug. It's a feature. It's evolution trying out new models of consciousness. It's nature's way of ensuring we don't all think the same way, see the same things, solve problems the same way. But first, you have to stop apologizing for it. You have to stop trying to fix it. You have to stop seeing it as a disorder and start seeing it as a difference. A difference that, when embraced and channeled and supported, could lead to breakthroughs we desperately need. The geniuses of history weren't special. They were just neurodivergent people who found ways to be themselves in a world that demanded conformity. They were shadow integrators before we had words for it. They were people who chose authenticity over acceptance, truth over comfort, innovation over imitation. And you have that same choice. Right now. Today. What will you choose? What I'm about to share with you changed everything. Not because it's magical or mysterious, but because it's so simple that your mind will try to complicate it. It's so obvious that you'll think it can't possibly work. It's so gentle that you'll want to make it harder. The 40-day shadow work protocol isn't about fixing your neurodivergence. It's about integration. It's about taking all the parts of yourself you've rejected, hidden, or tried to destroy, and welcoming them home. It's about discovering that your greatest wounds are actually your greatest gifts in disguise. But first, a warning. This isn't comfortable work. You're going to feel things you've spent years avoiding. You're going to face truths you've buried under diagnoses and medications and coping mechanisms. You're going to meet parts of yourself that might initially terrify you. That's normal. That's actually a sign you're on the right track. Because as Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So, let's begin. Week 1. Observe the shadow. Your only job this week is to notice. Not change, not fix, not improve. Just notice. Get a notebook. Not a digital one. There's something important about the physical act of writing when it comes to shadow work. Every time you feel triggered, ashamed, or defensive, write it down. But here's the key. Write it without judgment. Just facts. Felt rage when someone said I was too sensitive. Shut down when asked to make small talk. Apologized 3 times for asking a question. At the end of each day, look at your list and ask one question. What am I defending against? Not what's wrong with you. Not how to fix it. Just, what are you protecting yourself from feeling? You'll start to notice patterns. Maybe you defend against being seen as weak, so you never ask for help. Maybe you defend against rejection, so you reject yourself first. Maybe you defend against being controlled, so you can't follow any structure. These defenses aren't bad. They're strategies that protected you once, but now they might be imprisoning you. Week 2. Dialogue with shadow parts. This is where it gets interesting. This week, you're going to talk to your shadow parts. Yes, talk to them, like they're separate beings. Because in a way, they are. They're parts of you that got frozen in time, stuck at the age when you first rejected them. Pick one trigger from week 1. Let's say it's rage when called too sensitive. Sit quietly, close your eyes, and ask that rage, what do you want to tell me? Then listen. Actually, listen. You might hear, I'm tired of being wrong. I'm protecting you from being hurt again. I remember when Mom said sensitivity was weakness. Write down whatever comes. Don't edit. Don't judge. Don't try to make it profound. Sometimes your shadow parts speak in the voice of a hurt child because that's what they are. Then ask, what do you need? The answers might surprise you. I need to be allowed to exist. I need to know sensitivity is a superpower. I need you to stop abandoning me. This isn't crazy. This is integration. This is taking the parts of yourself you've exiled and inviting them back to the table. Week 3. Body release. Here's something they don't tell you about neurodivergence. It lives in your body as much as your mind. Years of masking create chronic tension. Years of suppression create energy blocks. Years of being told you're wrong create a body that's constantly braced for attack. This week, we let the body speak and release. Start with breath. Not meditation, not special techniques, just noticing your breath. Where is it stuck? Where is it shallow? Where does your body not want to breathe fully? For me, it was my solar plexus. Years of making myself smaller had literally compressed my breathing. I couldn't take a full breath because some part of me was still trying not to take up space. Then movement. Not exercise, not yoga poses, just movement. Put on music and move however your body wants to move. Flap your hands if that feels good. Rock back and forth. Spin in circles. Do the movements you've been told are weird or inappropriate. The first time I let myself truly stim without judgment, I cried for an hour. Not from sadness, but from relief. My body had been holding these movements inside for decades, and finally letting them out was like uncorking a shaken champagne bottle. Some of you will feel silly. Some will feel resistance. Some will feel nothing at first. That's all normal. The body needs time to trust that it's safe to express itself again. Weeks 4-6, integration and reframing. Now comes the alchemy. You've observed your shadows, dialogued with them, let your body release them. Now we transform them. Take each pattern you've discovered and ask, how is this actually a gift? Your inability to focus on boring things. That's your soul's refusal to waste your life on meaningless tasks. Your sensory sensitivity? That's your capacity for profound perception and deep experience. Your social anxiety? That's your intuitive understanding that most social interactions are performative BS. This isn't toxic positivity. This isn't pretending everything is fine. This is recognizing that every shadow contains gold. Every wound contains wisdom. Every symptom is actually your psyche trying to communicate something important. Week 4. Practice catching yourself in shadow moments and asking, what would this look like if it were a strength? When you're overwhelmed in a grocery store, instead of, I'm too sensitive, try, I'm perceiving more data than most people. How can I honor that while taking care of myself? Week 5. Start making practical changes based on your reframes. If your disorganization is actually non-linear thinking, how can you organize your life to honor that? If your social deficit is actually authenticity hunger, how can you create more genuine connections? Week 6. Integration. This is where you stop seeing your neurodivergent traits as things you have and start seeing them as who you are. Not disorders to manage, but differences to honor, not symptoms to suppress, but signals to understand. The shadow tracking grid. I've created a simple tool that you can use throughout this process. It's a grid with 5 columns. Trigger, chat, event. What happened? Emotional response. What did you feel? Body response. Where did you feel it? Shadow message. What is this protecting you from? Integration. How could this be a gift? Use this daily. Fill it out without judgment. Over 40 days, you'll see patterns that illuminate your entire shadow landscape. Warning signs. You're on the right track. Here's what nobody tells you about shadow work. It often feels worse before it feels better. You might experience vivid dreams or nightmares. Your unconscious is finally talking. Emotional surges. Frozen feelings are thawing. Relationship changes. You're no longer playing your old role. Identity confusion. Who are you without your defenses? Physical symptoms. The body is releasing stored trauma. These aren't signs to stop. They're signs you're actually doing the work. You're not getting worse. You're getting real. Breakthroughs to watch. For around week 3 or 4, something shifts. You might laugh at something that used to trigger you. Feel energy you haven't felt in years. Say no without guilt. Express a need without apology. Feel comfortable in your own skin for the first time. These moments might be fleeting at first. That's okay. You're rewiring decades of patterns. Be patient with yourself. Your first step. Here's what I want you to do right now. Today, before your mind talks you out of it. In the comments, write one small step you'll take this week to face your shadow. Not a huge commitment, not a life change, just one small step. Maybe it's, I'll notice when I apologize. Unnecessarily, I'll journal one trigger this week. I'll let myself stim for 5 minutes without judgment. I'll ask my anger what it's protecting. The size of the step doesn't matter. What matters is that you take it. Because shadow work isn't about dramatic breakthroughs. It's about daily choices to stop abandoning yourself and start coming home. Remember, you're not broken. You don't need fixing. You need integration. You need to welcome home all the parts of yourself you've exiled. You need to discover that everything you've been told is wrong with you might actually be everything that's right with you, just twisted and suppressed and shamed into shadow. The protocol isn't magic. It's just permission. Permission to be who you are. Permission to feel what you feel. Permission to discover that your neurodivergence isn't a curse to break but a gift to unwrap. 40 days. That's all. 40 days of choosing curiosity over judgment, integration over rejection, truth over comfort. What would your life look like if you stopped fighting yourself and started working with yourself? What would be possible if your greatest challenges became your greatest strengths? There's only one way to find out. The journey begins with a single step. What's yours? I need to tell you about the 11s. It started 3 weeks into my shadow work. I'd wake up at 11:11. Not occasionally. Every single night. My phone would die at 11% battery. I'd randomly check the time. 11:11. I'd finish a workout. 11 minutes, 11 seconds. I'd get a receipt. $11. 11. At first I dismissed it. Confirmation bias, right? You notice something once and then your brain seeks it out. That's what the rational part of me said. But Jung had a different explanation, one that changed how I understood everything. He called it synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that reveal the deeper patterns of the psyche. Not superstition, not wishful thinking, but the outer world reflecting the inner world in ways that defy rational explanation, but carry profound personal meaning. The meeting of an inner and outer event in a way that cannot be explained by cause and effect, and that is meaningful to the observer. The 11s appeared exactly when I was at my darkest point in shadow work, when I was facing the parts of myself I'd buried deepest, when I most wanted to quit, to go back to the comfortable numbness of my diagnoses. 11. In numerology, it's the number of spiritual awakening, of portals between worlds, 2 ones standing together, the integrated self and the shadow self, side by side. Not coincidence. Message. But it wasn't just numbers. The night I finally faced my deepest shame about being autistic, a book fell off my shelf. Jung's memories, dreams, reflections. It fell open to a page where he wrote about his own experience of being different, of seeing things others couldn't see, of being labeled, disturbed, and difficult. The next day, I met a stranger in a coffee shop who, unprompted, started talking about their own healing journey from autism. They used the exact words I'd written in my journal that morning. It's not about becoming normal. It's about becoming whole. These weren't random events. They were what Jung called a causal connecting principles, the universe responding to our inner work in ways that support our journey. The deeper you go into shadow work, the more these synchronicities appear. Not because you're going crazy, but because you're finally paying attention to the interconnectedness of everything. Dreams became especially vivid during this time. Jung said dreams are the royal road to the unconscious, and mine became a superhighway. One dream changed everything. I was in a house with many rooms. Each room contained a different version of me. The masked me, pretending to be neurotypical. The child me, stimming freely. The teenager me, desperate to fit in. The adult me, exhausted from performing. In the dream, I realized I'd been living in just one room, the masked room, while all these other selves waited in their separate spaces. The work wasn't to choose which room to live in. It was to knock down the walls, to let all versions of myself exist in the same space, to integrate. I woke up at, you guessed it, 11:11. That dream gave me a map for shadow work that no therapist ever provided. Each room represented a split-off part of myself. Each wall represented a defense mechanism. Integration meant not choosing between parts, but creating space for all of them. But here's the deeper truth about synchronicities. They're not rewards for doing the work right. They're not signs you're special or chosen. They're reflections of a psyche that's becoming conscious of itself. They're the universe showing you what's already true, but hidden. The more I integrated my shadow, the more synchronicities appeared. Not just personal ones, but collective ones. I'd think about a concept from Jung, and 3 different people would mention it that day. I'd have a breakthrough about my autism and suddenly see articles about neurodivergence everywhere. I'd release a piece of shame and meet someone struggling with the exact same issue. It was like tuning into a frequency that was always broadcasting, but I couldn't hear before. The static of my defenses had been blocking the signal. As I cleared the static through shadow work, the signal came through clear. This is what Jung meant when he talked about the collective unconscious. We're not separate individuals struggling alone with our shadows. We're all connected in what he called the objective psyche, a shared field of consciousness where individual healing creates ripples that affect everyone. When you integrate your shadow, you're not just healing yourself, you're healing a piece of the collective shadow. When you stop rejecting your neurodivergence, you make it easier for others to accept theirs. When you transform shame into acceptance, you add that frequency to the collective field. This is why the Reddit attackers were so vicious. My healing threatened not just their individual shadows, but the collective shadow they were participating in. The collective agreement that neurodivergence is a permanent disorder, that healing is impossible, that we must accept limitation as identity. But synchronicities showed me something else. There's also a collective light. For every attacker, there were silent supporters. For every harsh comment, there were private messages of hope. For every person clinging to their diagnosis, there were others secretly transforming. The synchronicities weren't random. They were showing me the underground river of healing flowing beneath the surface of collective denial. They were proving that individual transformation creates cracks in the collective shadow through which light can enter. One synchronicity stands out above all. 6 months into my journey, deeply struggling with whether to share my story publicly, I found a letter. It was in a used book I'd bought years ago and never read. The letter was from one stranger to another, dated 1987, and it said, "Your story of transformation needs to be told. Not for you, but for those who don't yet know transformation is possible. Your healing is not yours alone. It belongs to everyone who needs hope." I sat there, holding this 35-year-old letter from one stranger to another, knowing it was also from the universe to me, or from my integrated self to my doubting self, or from Jung's collective unconscious to anyone brave enough to listen. The synchronicities continue. They'll continue for you too once you start this work, not as magical thinking, but as meaningful connection, not as escape from reality, but as deeper entry into it, not as proof you're special, but as evidence. We're all connected. So here's your prompt, and make it as real as you can. Write your journey in one sentence, as if speaking to your future self. Not your hoped-for journey or your ideal journey, but your actual journey, where you are now and where you're heading, what you're leaving behind and what you're moving toward. Mine was, From apologizing for existing to celebrating my difference. What's yours? Write it down. Put it somewhere you'll see it. Because synchronicities need intention to manifest. They need you to declare your direction so the universe can respond. They need you to commit to your journey so the support can find you. And when the synchronicities start appearing, and they will, don't dismiss them. Don't explain them away. Don't reduce them to coincidence. They're not coincidence. They're correspondence. They're the outer world saying yes to your inner work. They're proof that you're not alone in this journey, even when it feels like you are. The 11s still appear for me, though less frequently now, not because the magic has faded, but because the message was received. The portal between shadow and light is open. The integration is happening. The transformation is real. Your synchronicities will be different. Your dreams will carry different messages. Your journey will have its own sacred markers, but they'll come. Once you start the real work, once you choose integration over separation, once you stop fighting yourself and start loving yourself home, they'll come. And when they do, you'll know what Jung knew. We're all connected. Individual healing is collective healing. Your transformation matters, not just for you, but for everyone. The universe is waiting to support your journey. It's already started. The fact that you're reading this, right now, at this exact moment in your life, that's not coincidence either. I need to tell you what happened to one of my attackers, because this is where everything comes together, where the shadow reveals its final secret, where resistance transforms into breakthrough, where the choice that changes everything becomes clear. 6 months after the Reddit massacre, I received an email. The subject line simply said, "I was wrong." My body tensed, preparing for another attack. But what I read instead broke me open in a completely different way. You probably don't remember me, but I wrote one of the cruelest comments on your post. I called you dangerous. I said you were giving false hope. I think I even used words I'm too ashamed to repeat now. I attacked you because your story terrified me. If healing was possible, then I'd wasted 15 years. If integration was real, then I'd chosen suffering. If you were right, then everything I'd built my identity on was a lie. So, I tried to destroy you. Or really, I tried to destroy the hope you represented. But your post haunted me. Your words about shadow work, about integration, about our diagnoses being invitations rather than sentences. They wouldn't leave me alone. So, finally, angry and desperate to prove you wrong, I tried it. I started shadow work just to gather evidence that it didn't work. It's been 6 months. I'm writing this at 3 a.m. because I can't sleep. Not from anxiety this time, but from aliveness. For the first time in my adult life, I feel alive. Not fixed, not cured, not normal, but alive, integrated, whole. My autism hasn't disappeared, but it's transformed from a prison into a perspective. My sensitivity hasn't lessened, but it's become a superpower instead of a curse. I haven't become someone else. I've become myself. I'm sorry for attacking you, but more than that, I'm grateful. Your courage to share your story gave me permission to question mine. Your healing showed me healing was possible. Your integration gave me a map home to myself. Thank you for not letting people like me silence you. Thank you for choosing truth over comfort. Thank you for lighting a candle in the darkness, even when we tried to blow it out. Especially when we tried to blow it out. I sat at my computer and wept. Not just for them, not just for me, but for all of us. For everyone trapped in the shadow of permanent disorder. For everyone who attacks hope because they've lost their own. For everyone who chooses familiar suffering over unfamiliar possibility. Because here's what that email revealed. The fiercest attackers are the closest to breakthrough. The loudest deniers are the ones whose shadows are screaming for integration. The ones who try hardest to destroy hope are the ones who need it most. But they also need to choose it. And that's the ultimate choice Jung spent his life illuminating. The choice between consciousness and unconsciousness. Between integration and separation. Between becoming whole or staying split. This choice isn't made once. It's made moment by moment, day by day. Every time you feel the urge to mask, you choose. Every time you want to apologize for existing, you choose. Every time you're tempted to reduce yourself to a diagnosis, you choose. Choose consciousness. And you begin the difficult journey of integration. Choose unconsciousness, and you remain comfortable but confined. Choose consciousness, and you face everything you've hidden. Choose unconsciousness, and it faces you anyway, projected onto others, somatized in your body, lived out as fate. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Those aren't just words. They're the keys to the prison. They're the map to freedom. They're the choice that changes everything. So, here's my letter to my former self, the one who sat in therapist offices collecting diagnoses like badges of brokenness, the one who apologized to houseplants, the one who believed the story that she was fundamentally flawed. Dear former self, you weren't broken. You were buried. Buried under expectations that never fit. Buried under diagnoses that explained your struggles, but not your strengths. Buried under the collective shadow of a world that fears difference. Your autism wasn't a disorder. It was your authenticity screaming to be expressed. Your ADHD wasn't a deficit. It was your consciousness refusing to be caged. Your sensitivity wasn't weakness. It was your superpower in hiding. Every symptom was a signal. Every struggle was a strength twisted by shame. Every diagnosis was a doorway you were too scared to walk through. You spent so long trying to fix yourself that you never realized you were trying to fix the wrong thing. The problem wasn't you. It was the story you believed about yourself. The problem wasn't your brain. It was the world that couldn't hold your brilliance. I know you can't see it yet. I know you're drowning in the trying to be normal exhaustion. I know you believe the experts who say this is forever, that management is the best you can hope for, that your differences are deficits to be minimized. They're wrong. Not maliciously wrong, but limited by their own shadows, their own fears, their own investment in the system that sees you as disordered. Your journey won't be easy. You'll face every shadow you've hidden. You'll feel every emotion you've numbed. You'll grieve for all the years you spent at war with yourself. You'll rage at a world that taught you to hate your own nature. But on the other side of that dark night, something incredible waits. Not a cure. You were never sick. Not fixing. You were never broken. But integration, wholeness, the discovery that everything you thought was wrong with you is actually everything that's right with you. Finally freed from the shadow of shame. You'll discover that your inability to tolerate small talk is actually a hunger for truth. Your sensory sensitivity is actually profound perception. Your need for routine is actually the discipline of genius. Your intense focus is actually the laser that cuts through illusion to essence. You'll stop apologizing for existing and start celebrating your difference. You'll stop masking your nature and start expressing your truth. You'll stop seeing yourself through the lens of disorder and start seeing yourself through the lens of diversity. And the world will shift in response, not because it changes, but because you do. You'll find your tribe, not the tribe of shared diagnosis, but the tribe of shared authenticity. You'll create work that honors your brain instead of fighting it. You'll build relationships based on truth instead of performance. But most importantly, you'll come home to yourself. After all the wandering in the wasteland of trying to be someone else, you'll finally arrive where you always belonged, in your own skin, in your own truth, in your own unique way of being human. The journey from here to there isn't through fixing or curing or becoming normal. It's through integration, through shadow work, through the choice, made daily, to stop abandoning yourself and start embracing yourself. Your neurodivergence isn't your curse. It's your invitation to depth, to authenticity, to a life that actually fits who you are instead of who you're supposed to be. Trust the journey. Trust your differences. Trust that everything you need is already within you, waiting in the shadow, holding gifts disguised as symptoms. You're not broken. You never were. You're just beginning to bloom. With all my love and the wisdom of integration, your future self. P.S. That houseplant you apologized to? It's still alive, thriving actually. Turns out it never needed your apology. It just needed water and light, just like you. That letter isn't just to my former self. It's to anyone who's ever believed they were fundamentally flawed. It's to everyone still fighting themselves instead of flowing with themselves. It's to you, reading this right now, wondering if transformation is really possible. It is, but you have to choose it. And that choice isn't what you think. It's not choosing to be neurotypical. That's impossible and unnecessary. It's not choosing to be fixed. You're not broken. It's not choosing to be someone else. The world needs who you actually are. The choice is simpler and more radical. Choose to stop believing the story of permanent disorder. Choose to start exploring the story of integration. Choose to stop seeing symptoms and start seeing signals. Choose to stop fighting your nature and start working with it. But here's what makes this choice so difficult. You have to be willing to lose who you think you are to discover who you really are. You have to be willing to let your identity as disordered die, so your identity as whole can be born. You have to be willing to disappoint others who are invested in your limitation, so you can finally stop disappointing yourself. The attackers on Reddit made their choice. They chose to defend their limitations rather than explore their possibilities. They chose the familiar prison over the unknown freedom. They chose to attack hope rather than cultivate it. But one of them chose differently. 6 months later, they chose courage over comfort. They chose curiosity over certainty. They chose to test the possibility of transformation instead of dismissing it. And that choice changed everything. Now, it's your turn. What would you say to your younger self about their flaws now, knowing what you know, seeing what you've seen, feeling what you've felt? What would you tell that younger version who believed the story of brokenness? Take a moment, really feel into it. What would you say to the child who first learned they were different? To the teenager who tried so hard to fit in? To the adult who accepted limitation as identity? Write it in the comments. Make it real. Make it specific. Make it the truth you needed to hear when all you heard was disorder. Because here's the final secret. Your healing isn't just for you. Every person who integrates their shadow makes it easier for others to integrate theirs. Every person who transforms diagnosis into discovery lights a path for others to follow. Every person who chooses wholeness over brokenness adds to the collective healing. The attackers taught me something profound. We're all in this together, whether we know it or not. Their shadows and my shadows were dancing together. Their fear and my courage were two sides of the same coin. Their attack was actually a cry for help, disguised as aggression. We're all connected in the collective unconscious. Your healing ripples out. Your integration inspires others. Your choice to stop believing in permanent limitation creates cracks in the collective agreement that limitation is necessary. This is why they tried so hard to silence me. Not because I was wrong, but because I was proving that the emperor has no clothes. That the $13 billion industry of managing disorders might actually be managing possibilities. That what we call mental illness might actually be spiritual emergence. That what we diagnose as broken might actually be different ways of being magnificently human. The choice is yours. Not the choice to be normal. That ship has sailed, and thank God for that. Not the choice to be cured. You were never sick. But the choice to integrate all of yourself. The choice to stop making your differences wrong. The choice to discover that your greatest wound is your greatest invitation to wholeness. Jung knew this. He lived this. He transformed his own psychosis into the insights that would heal millions. He didn't overcome his differences. He integrated them. He didn't become normal. He became whole. He didn't cure his visions. He learned from them. And so can you. So can we all. The ultimate choice isn't between order and disorder. It's between separation and integration. It's between fighting yourself and loving yourself home. It's between the small story of permanent limitation and the vast story of human possibility. What story will you choose? What life will you create? What shadow will you transform into light? The choice is always yours. And it's always now. What if I told you that everything we call mental illness is actually evolution trying to happen? What if neurodivergence isn't a glitch in the system, but an upgrade we don't understand yet? What if the rising rates of autism and ADHD aren't a crisis, but a collective awakening? What if your different brain isn't broken, but is instead exactly what humanity needs for its next leap? Sit with that for a moment. Feel the resistance, the disbelief, the that can't be true response. That resistance? That's the collective shadow fighting to maintain the story of disorder. Because if neurodivergence is evolution, then everything changes. Everything. Jung saw this coming. He wrote, "The world hangs on a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. It is not the reality of the hydrogen bomb that must fear, but what man will do with it." He understood that humanity's survival doesn't depend on controlling the external world, but on evolving our consciousness. And evolution doesn't happen uniformly. It happens through variation, through difference, through what we're currently calling disorders. Think about it. What are the traits of autism? Pattern recognition, sensory sensitivity, direct communication, inability to tolerate social falsehood, deep focus, system thinking. Now tell me, in a world drowning in lies, overwhelm, and disconnection, aren't these exactly the traits we need? What about ADHD, hyper-awareness, rapid processing, creative connection making, inability to tolerate boredom, constant questioning, natural rebellion against arbitrary authority? In a world that needs innovation, revolution, and rapid adaptation, aren't these precisely the qualities that could save us? We're not disordered. We're the canaries in the coal mine. We're the ones who can't tolerate the toxicity everyone else has normalized. We're the ones whose nervous systems scream something's wrong in a world that insists everything's fine. But here's the profound realization. We're not just warning signals. We're the solution, trying to emerge. Every autistic person who can't engage in small talk is pushing humanity toward authentic communication. Every ADHD brain that rebels against meaningless tasks is demanding that work have purpose. Every sensitive nervous system that overloads in modern environments is saying this world we've created isn't fit for human thriving. We're not broken. The world is, and we're evolution's attempt to fix it. This isn't wishful thinking. Look at history. Every major leap in human consciousness came through individuals who thought differently, who saw differently, who couldn't fit into the existing paradigm because they were built for the next one. Einstein's physics came from a mind that worked in pictures, not words. Tesla's inventions came from visions others would call hallucinations. Jung's psychology came from a psyche that bridged realities others couldn't see. They weren't disordered. They were evolved. And they were showing us where we're all heading. But here's what's different now. It's not just individual evolution anymore. It's collective. The sheer number of neurodivergent people being born isn't random. It's purposeful. It's evolution working on a species level, trying to create enough variation to ensure some of us can thrive in whatever world is coming. Because the old world, the neurotypical world of linear thinking, emotional suppression, and surface social performance, is dying. You can see it everywhere. Systems failing, structures crumbling, the center not holding. And what worked in that world won't work in what's emerging. We need minds that can hold paradox. We need nervous systems that detect subtlety. We need hearts that can't tolerate falsehood. We need souls that choose authenticity over acceptance. We need exactly what we've been medicating away. This is the new paradigm. Neurodivergence as evolution, symptoms as signals, diagnosis as invitation, integration as transformation. Not just personal transformation, but collective evolution. And here's how we build it. Step 1. Stop apologizing. Every time you apologize for your differences, you reinforce the old paradigm. Stop. Your sensitivity isn't too much. The world is too harsh. Your focus isn't too narrow. Most people's is too scattered. Your directness isn't rude. Social dishonesty is. Step 2. Create neurodivergent, honoring spaces. We need environments that work with our wiring, not against it. Workplaces that honor different rhythms. Schools that celebrate different ways of learning. Communities that value authenticity over performance. Start where you are. Make your home, your relationships, your daily life honor your needs. Step 3. Share your gifts. Stop hiding what makes you different. The world needs your pattern recognition, your sensitivity, your inability to tolerate BS. Share your perspective. Create from your difference. Solve problems others can't see. Be the future that's trying to emerge through you. Step 4. Connect and collaborate. Find others on this journey, not to commiserate about disorders, but to celebrate differences. Create together. Build together. Show the world what's possible when neurodivergent minds collaborate instead of compete. Step 5. Teach the children. The next generation needs to know they're not broken. They need to understand their differences as gifts. They need models of integrated, thriving, neurodivergent adults. Be that model. Change the story for those coming after us. I'm building this community now. Not a support group for managing disorders, but a laboratory for human evolution. A place where we experiment with what's possible when we stop trying to fit into the old world and start creating the new one. Here's how you can join. The Discord community, a space for deep discussion, shadow work support, and collaborative projects, where we explore what neurodivergence as evolution actually means in practice. The 40-day challenge. Start your integration journey with others. Share your process. Learn from each other. Transform together. The resource library, shadow work tools, integration practices, alternative perspectives on neurodivergence. Everything you need to start seeing your differences as gifts. The Story Project. Share your transformation story. Not to inspire others, though it will, but to add your thread to the new narrative we're weaving about what it means to be human. But more than any formal structure, what we're building is a new story. A story where neurodivergence is honored, where sensitivity is strength, where different ways of thinking are celebrated, where the future of humanity requires all kinds of minds. What community would you build if no one judged your truth? Really think about it. If you could create a space where your exact way of being was not just accepted, but celebrated as necessary, what would that look like? Write it down. Make it real, because that's not a fantasy. That's a blueprint. That's evolution showing you what wants to emerge. That's your piece of the new paradigm. We're not alone in this. All over the world, people are waking up to this truth, questioning the disorder narrative, exploring integration over medication, choosing wholeness over brokenness, building new ways of being human. The old paradigm is fighting back. Of course it is. $13 billion in pharmaceutical profits, entire careers built on the disorder model, collective investment in the story of permanent limitation. The shadow doesn't release its grip easily, but something stronger is emerging. The truth that we're not disordered, but different. Not broken, but breaking through. Not problems to be solved, but evolution in action. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. Once you know it, you can't unknow it. The question isn't whether this shift will happen. It's already happening. The question is whether you'll be part of it. Whether you'll add your voice to the new story. Whether you'll stop apologizing for your evolution and start embodying it. Because here's the final truth. We need you. The world needs your exact flavor of neurodivergence, your specific sensitivity, your particular way of processing reality, your unique inability to tolerate what others accept. We need the gifts hidden in your shadow. We need the wisdom in your wounds. We need the future trying to emerge through your difference. So I'll ask one more time. What community would you build if no one judged your truth? And then, will you build it? Will you stop waiting for permission to be yourself and start giving others permission through your example? Will you stop believing the old story and start living the new one? Will you join us in proving that neurodivergence isn't disorder but evolution, not limitation but invitation, not something to cure but something to cultivate? The future is neurodivergent, not exclusively but necessarily, not instead of neurotypical but alongside it. All kinds of minds working together, creating a world that works for everyone. That's the vision. That's the possibility. That's the choice. And it starts with you, right here, right now, today. Welcome to the evolution. Welcome to the new paradigm. Welcome home to yourself. The next video will explore how the body holds these truths. The body keeps the truth. Polyvagal shadow work for neurodivergent healing. Because integration isn't just mental, it's somatic, it's cellular. It's remembering with your whole being who you really are. But for now, just this. You're not broken. You never were. You're the future, trying to be born. And we're all here, waiting to be born with you.